The torches in the great hall burned too bright for a night meant to be quiet. Nora Hale stood in the center of the stone floor, and every pair of eyes in the pack turned toward her at once. She could feel the weight of them pressing against her skin like 100 small hands. Cade Whitlock stood 3 steps above her on the raised platform, dressed in the black coat that marked him as the Alpha King, the coat he wore only for matters that could not be undone. His jaw was tight, his hands were folded behind his back the way they always were when he wanted to look calm and did not feel calm at all. Nobody in the hall spoke. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "I reject the bond," Cade said. The words fell into the silence, like stones dropped into still water. They were old words, ceremonial words, spoken only once in a lifetime, and once spoken, they could never be taken back. The pack elders had told her this would happen. She had told herself she was ready. She was not ready, but she did not let her face show it. Nora felt her heart drop somewhere below her ribs, felt it land hard and heavy, and still her expression did not change. She had practiced this moment in her head 100 times in the days leading up to tonight, had imagined herself crumbling, imagined herself screaming his name, imagined herself running from the hall in tears while the whole pack watched. She had promised herself none of that would happen, not here, not in front of them. "Understood," she said. Her voice did not shake. Cade blinked, just once. It was such a small movement that most of the pack would not have noticed it. But Nora noticed. She had spent enough nights studying his face to know every twitch of it, every flicker, every place where his control had small hairline cracks. She saw the crack now. He had expected tears. He had expected her to fall apart in front of everyone, the way rejected mates always did, sobbing and begging and grabbing at his sleeve while the elders looked away in pity. He had built himself up for that moment, had steeled himself against her sadness the way a man steels himself against a blow he knows is coming. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, turned on her heel, and walked out of the hall. Her boots struck the stone floor in a steady rhythm, one step after another. None of them rushed, none of them slow. The pack parted for her without being asked. Some of them stared, some of them looked away, embarrassed on her behalf. She did not look at any of them. She kept her eyes fixed on the tall wooden doors at the end of the hall, doors that seemed impossibly far away and yet somehow arrived beneath her hands before she was ready for them. She pushed the doors open. Cold night air hit her face. She did not cry. Behind her, the hall had gone utterly silent, and in that silence Cade Whitlock stood on his platform with the ceremonial words still hanging in the air around him. Words he had waited months to say, words that were supposed to set him free. He did not feel free. He felt like something had been taken from him, though he could not name what it was, since it was supposed to be him doing the taking. He watched the doors swing shut behind her, watched the torchlight flicker in the sudden draft, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cade Whitlock did not know what to do with his own hands. Outside, the night was cold enough to sting. Nora walked past the training yard, past the long row of guard quarters, past the well where the younger pack members drew water each morning while gossiping about things that no longer mattered to her. She walked until the sounds of the hall faded behind her, until the only noise left was her own breathing and the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. She did not stop until she reached the edge of the property, where the fence met the tree line and the forest began its slow climb into darkness. There, finally, alone, she let her shoulders drop. Just her shoulders, nothing more. She would not cry. She had decided that hours ago, in the small room where she dressed for the ceremony, staring at her own reflection in a cracked mirror that had belonged to her mother. Tears were for people who owed her something. Cade did not owe her tears. He owed her nothing at all. Not anymore, not since the moment those words left his mouth. And she was not going to hand him the satisfaction of watching her fall apart over a debt he had already erased. She pressed her palm flat against the rough bark of the nearest tree, felt the cold texture of it under her skin, focused on that instead of the ache spreading through her chest. It was a trick her grandmother had taught her as a child, a way of grounding herself when the world felt like it was tilting. Find something solid, hold on to it, let the feeling pass through your hand instead of your heart. It worked, mostly. Mostly. A twig snapped somewhere behind her, and she turned quickly, every muscle in her body tensing at once. But it was only Owen Price, one of the border guards, standing a respectful distance away, with his hands shoved into his pockets, and an expression on his face that suggested he did not know whether to speak or to leave. "You don't have to say anything," Nora told him. "I wasn't going to," Owen said. Then, after a pause, "You want company or you want quiet?" "Quiet." He nodded and sat down on a low rock a few feet away, close enough that she was not alone, far enough that he was not intruding. It was, Nora thought, exactly the right amount of kindness. Not too much, not too little. Owen had always understood the difference, which was more than she could say for most people in the pack. They stayed like that for a long while, the two of them, saying nothing, while the moon rose higher over the trees and the cold worked its way through her coat. Eventually, Owen spoke again, quietly. "The whole pack expected you to cry." "I know. You didn't." "No." He glanced at her sideways. "Was that hard?" Nora considered the question carefully before answering, the way she considered most things. "Harder than anything I've ever done," she admitted. "But I'd do it again." Owen didn't ask why. He simply nodded, as if her answer made perfect sense, as if he understood something about pride and dignity that most people spent a lifetime failing to learn. Back in the hall, the ceremony had long since ended, the pack members filing out in small clusters, whispering to one another about what they had just witnessed. Cade remained on the platform long after the last of them had gone, staring at the space where Nora had stood, at the exact spot where her boots had pressed into the stone floor. His advisor, a lean gray-haired man named Edwin, approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. "That went as expected," Edwin said carefully. "Did it?" Cade replied. It was not a question. Edwin studied him for a long moment. "You look like a man who lost something tonight, Alpha, not a man who set something free." Cade said nothing. "She didn't cry," Edwin added, almost to himself. "In 30 years, I have never seen a rejected mate leave that hall with dry eyes." "I noticed," Cade said, and his voice came out sharper than he intended. Edwin raised an eyebrow, but wisely chose not to comment further. He bowed his head slightly and left the Alpha alone in the hall, alone with the torches and the cold stone and the strange, hollow feeling that had settled into his chest, like a stone dropped into a well too deep to hear it land. Cade told himself the feeling was relief. He told himself this for a long time. He did not believe it, not even a little, but he told himself anyway, because the alternative was to admit that something about tonight had gone very wrong, and Alpha Kings did not admit such things, not even to themselves, not even in the dark, empty hours after everyone else had gone to sleep and left him standing alone with his own reflection in the polished stone floor beneath his boots. Outside, far past the training yard, past the guard quarters, past the well, Nora Hale sat beside a quiet border guard under a rising moon, her back straight, her eyes dry, her heart carefully folded shut, and for the first time in her life she understood that silence could be its own kind of strength, sharper and heavier than any tears could ever be. She did not know yet how deeply that silence would cut into the man who had caused it. She would find out soon enough. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Nora Hale requested a transfer to the border outpost, the posting nobody wanted, the one so far from the main hall that supply wagons only reached it twice a month. The elders tried to talk her out of it. "It's cold out there," one of them said, "isolated, dangerous even, with the rival packs pushing at the boundary lines." "I know what it is," Nora answered. "That's why I want it." She did not explain further, and the elders did not push, because everyone in the pack already understood the unspoken reason behind her request. She wanted distance. She wanted walls between herself and the hall where the rejection had happened, between herself and the man who had spoken those words in front of everyone she knew. They granted her the transfer within the week. The outpost was a squat stone building surrounded by a low wall, manned by a rotating handful of guards who took their duties seriously because there was little else to do out there besides take things seriously. Nora arrived with a single bag over her shoulder and a look on her face that told the other guards not to ask questions. They didn't. Within days, she had proven herself useful in ways that went beyond simple duty. She could track a scent through frozen mud better than guards twice her age. She could read the weather before it turned, could tell from the smell of the wind whether a storm was 2 hours away or 12. She took the worst shifts without complaint, the cold ones, the long ones, the ones in the deep hours of night when most guards preferred to be asleep. Slowly, the other guards began to respect her, not because of who she had been in the hall, not because of the name attached to her rejection, but because of what she did with her hands and her eyes and her patience out here on the frozen edge of the territory. Owen had transferred with her, quietly, without making a show of it, simply requesting a posting change the same week she did. Nobody questioned it. He and Nora fell into an easy rhythm together, sharing watch duties, sharing quiet meals in the small mess hall, talking about nothing important in the long stretches between patrols. One evening, a younger guard named Daniel Cross joined their table for the first time, dropping his tray down across from Nora with the easy confidence of someone who had not yet learned to be intimidated by her. "You're the one who didn't cry," he said, not unkindly, simply stating a fact he found interesting. "Word travels," Nora said. "Everywhere," Daniel admitted. "Half the pack thinks you're made of stone. The other half thinks you're the strongest person any of them have ever met." "What do you think?" Daniel considered the question seriously, the way Nora appreciated people considering things, rather than answering too quickly. "I think," he said finally, "that stone doesn't feel anything. And I don't think that's what happened to you." Nora looked at him for a long moment. Something in his answer landed differently than she expected, cutting through the careful wall she kept around herself. She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either, and Owen, watching the exchange from across the table, hid a small smile behind his cup. Daniel became a regular presence after that. He was easy company, funny in a dry, understated way, never pushing, never prying, simply there, steady, offering conversation when she wanted it, and silence when she didn't. He treated her the way a person treats someone who is already whole, not someone who needs fixing or comforting or careful handling. It was, Nora realized after a few weeks, a relief she had not known she needed. Meanwhile, far from the outpost, word of Nora's steady rise reached the main hall in small pieces, carried by traveling guards and supply runners, who mentioned her almost in passing, the way people mention weather or crop yields, without realizing the weight their words carried when they reached certain ears. "She's become quite good out there," Edwin mentioned one evening, not looking up from the reports spread across his desk. "The border commander wants to promote her to lead the outpost within the year." Cade did not respond immediately. He was standing near the window of his study, looking out at nothing in particular, his hands folded behind his back in the same posture he wore during ceremonies. "Good," he said eventually. "You don't sound like you mean that." "I mean it." Edwin glanced up at him, studying the tight line of his shoulders, the way his jaw worked slightly before he spoke, small signs that Edwin had learned to read over many years of service. "You could visit the outpost," he suggested carefully, "as part of your regular inspection rounds. Nothing more than that. I have no reason to visit the outpost. The border commander would appreciate the oversight." Cade turned from the window. "Since when do you concern yourself with the border commander's preferences?" "Since you started finding excuses to ask about a guard posted 3 days' ride from here," Edwin replied, his tone even, careful, the tone of a man who had served long enough to speak plainly, when plain speaking was needed. Cade said nothing to that. He turned back to the window instead, and Edwin, wise enough to know when a conversation had reached its end, gathered his reports and left the room without another word. Cade stood alone for a long time after that, staring at the darkening sky, thinking about a border outpost 3 days' ride away, and a guard who had walked out of his rejection ceremony with dry eyes and a straight spine. He told himself he was not thinking about her specifically. He told himself this several times over the following weeks, each time with less conviction than the time before. Reports kept arriving. A skirmish along the northern boundary, handled swiftly and cleanly under Nora's direction, with no losses on either side despite the rival pack's aggressive push. A supply shortage during a harsh storm, solved by her quick thinking when she redirected reserves from a lesser-used store nobody else remembered existed. A young recruit, who had nearly frozen during a night patrol, found and carried back to the outpost on her own shoulders after she noticed his absence before anyone else did. Each report was small on its own. Together, they built into something Cade could not ignore, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how many times he told himself the outpost's affairs were simply routine business requiring routine attention. Eventually, he stopped pretending even to himself. He scheduled an inspection tour of the northern border outposts, listing Nora's post 3rd on a route of 5, careful to bury it among others so it would not draw attention. Edwin, reading the schedule over Cade's shoulder, said nothing, though the corner of his mouth twitched slightly in a way that suggested he understood exactly what was happening and had chosen, wisely, not to comment on it. The tour was set for 3 weeks out. Nora, unaware of any of this, continued her steady life at the outpost, unaware that the man who had rejected her in front of the entire pack was now finding reasons, careful and quiet reasons, to close the distance she had worked so hard to create. She spent her evenings with Owen and Daniel, playing simple card games by lamplight, laughing more easily than she had in months. She trained the younger recruits during the day, patient with their mistakes, firm with their laziness, earning a reputation as a guard who expected excellence but never cruelty. One night, after a long patrol, Daniel walked her back to her quarters, the two of them talking quietly under a clear sky, full of stars neither of them bothered naming. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, stopping outside her door. "You can ask. Do you ever think about going back to the main hall, I mean? Not for him, just in general." Nora considered the question, turning it over the way she turned over most things before answering. "I think about it," she admitted, "but not the way you'd expect. I don't think about missing it. I think about how small it feels now, looking back at it from out here." Daniel nodded slowly, as if that answer satisfied something in him. "That's a good way to think about it." "It's the only way I know how," Nora said, and there was the faintest trace of a smile on her face, small but real, the kind of smile that had been rare on her since the night of the ceremony. Daniel noticed it. He said nothing about it, but he noticed, and something in his own chest settled a little easier for having seen it. 3 weeks later, almost to the day, a rider arrived at the outpost carrying word that the Alpha King's inspection tour would reach their post within the following week. Nora received the news standing in the mess hall, a cup of tea halfway to her lips, and for a moment, just a moment, her hand went still in the air. Then she set the cup down, straightened her shoulders, and returned to the report she had been reading, her face giving away nothing at all. Owen, watching from across the room, exchanged a glance with Daniel, and neither of them said a word, though both of them understood that something was about to shift, quietly and irreversibly, in the careful, steady life Nora had built for herself out here on the frozen edge of the territory. The inspection party arrived at the outpost on a gray afternoon, banners snapping in a cold wind, a dozen mounted guards flanking the Alpha King as he rode through the gate. Nora stood at attention with the rest of the outpost guards, lined up in the courtyard, her spine straight, her hands folded behind her back, her expression carefully arranged into the same neutral mask she had worn since the night of the ceremony. Cade dismounted slowly. His eyes swept the line of guards, and though he tried to make the movement casual, tried to make it look like a routine inspection glance, his gaze caught on Nora's face for half a second longer than it caught on anyone else's. She did not react. Not a flicker. Not a breath out of place. He looked away first. The commander of the outpost, a broad-shouldered woman named Grace, stepped forward to greet him with the formal words expected of the occasion, and Cade responded with the formal words expected in return, and for a while, the whole affair proceeded exactly as any inspection tour should, with reports exchanged and supplies counted and patrol routes reviewed on a table spread with maps. Nora was called forward twice during the review, once to confirm a border skirmish report, once to explain the redirected supply route she had organized during the storm. Both times she spoke clearly, briefly, without unnecessary words, addressing the Alpha King with the same formal respect she gave every superior, nothing more, nothing less. "Guard Hale," Cade said the second time, his voice even. "The supply route you organized. Whose idea was it to use the eastern store?" "Mine," Nora said. "It was closer to the affected outposts and had gone unused since the winter before last." "Good thinking. Thank you, Alpha." There was nothing wrong with the exchange. It was exactly the kind of exchange that happened during every inspection tour. Professional, brief, forgettable. And yet Cade found himself replaying it in his head for the rest of the afternoon, turning over the sound of her voice saying his title with the same flat respect she might give a stranger, searching for some crack in it that he did not find. That evening, a dinner was arranged for the visiting party and the outpost officers, a modest affair compared to the feasts held at the main hall, but formal enough that everyone wore their dress uniforms and minded their manners. Nora sat several seats down the long table from Cade, close enough to hear the conversation, far enough that she was not required to participate in it directly. Partway through the meal, Cade addressed her again, this time using the wrong syllable in her name, a small mispronunciation that anyone might make by accident. "Guard Nor," he said, then caught himself. "Hale. I apologize." It was such a small thing, a slip of the tongue, but Cade had not slipped. He had done it deliberately, testing, watching for the smallest flinch, the smallest sign that his voice still carried some old weight for her. Nora did not flinch. "No offense taken, Alpha," she said, and returned to her meal as though nothing at all had happened. Cade set down his fork. Something about her composure, so complete, so effortless, so entirely without performance, unsettled him more than tears ever could have. He had spent weeks convincing himself that her calm at the ceremony had been a mask, a brave front she wore only until she was alone, that somewhere behind closed doors she had broken down the way everyone expected. But watching her now, months later, unbothered by his deliberate test, he began to understand a truth he did not want to face. The calm was not a mask. It was her. Grace, the outpost commander, noticed the exchange and, being a woman who valued directness, addressed it without hesitation once the meal had ended and the officers had dispersed to their separate duties. "You tested her," Grace said, catching Cade alone near the courtyard wall. "I don't know what you mean. You mispronounced her name on purpose. I've commanded this outpost long enough to recognize a deliberate mistake when I hear one." Cade said nothing, which was answer enough. Grace studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "She's the best guard I have," she said finally. "Not because of anything to do with you, Alpha. Because of what she's built here, on her own, since she arrived. I'd think carefully before doing anything that might unsettle that. I have no intention of unsettling anything." "Good," Grace said, "because whatever you're looking for from her, I don't think you're going to find it. Not the way you're looking." She left him standing there with the words hanging in the cold air, and Cade found he had no response for them, because some part of him suspected she was right and did not know what to do with that suspicion. The following morning, before the inspection party was set to depart, a messenger arrived at the outpost gate at a full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat, his face pale with urgency. "Rival pack forces," he gasped, sliding from his horse. "Moving on the eastern boundary. A group has taken hostages from the trading post there, 3 of our people." The courtyard erupted into motion. Grace began barking orders immediately, guards scrambling toward weapons and horses, Cade's own escort forming up around him out of instinct and training. "How many hostiles?" Cade demanded. "Unclear," the messenger said. "At least a dozen, maybe more." Nora was already moving before anyone gave her an order, strapping on gear with quick, practiced hands, her face set into the same focused calm she brought to every crisis. "I know the trading post," she said, addressing Grace directly. "I've patrolled that route a dozen times. There's a ravine half a mile north that gives cover for an approach they won't expect." Grace nodded immediately. "Take point. Whitlock's escort will follow your lead." Cade opened his mouth, some instinct rising in him to object, to insist his own guards take the lead, old habits of command rising up out of years of practice. But he caught himself, recognizing in that moment that Nora knew this land better than anyone else present, that her knowledge was worth more right now than his rank. "Lead on," he said instead. Nora glanced at him, the barest flicker of surprise crossing her face at his willingness to defer, and then she turned and moved, and the whole party followed her out through the gate at a hard ride toward the eastern boundary. The ravine she had mentioned proved exactly as useful as she promised, a natural corridor of rock and brush that let the rescue party approach the trading post from an angle the rival pack scouts had not thought to watch. Nora directed the positioning with quiet, clipped instructions, splitting the group into two flanks, holding Cade's more experienced fighters in reserve, while her own outpost guards, familiar with the terrain, moved into position first. The confrontation that followed was fast and dangerous, though thankfully far less bloody than it might have been. Nora led the first flank in a controlled push that drew the rival guards' attention away from the hostages, while a second team, moving on her signal, slipped in from the opposite side and freed the three captives before the situation could turn into anything worse. There were injuries. Bruises, a broken arm on one of the rival fighters, a shallow cut along Owen's forearm that he waved off as nothing. But nobody died, and the hostages were recovered safe, and within an hour the rival pack's remaining forces had withdrawn back across the boundary line, unwilling to risk further conflict against a force that had outmaneuvered them so completely. Cade watched the entire operation from where Nora had positioned him, in the reserve line, and found himself doing something he rarely did during any conflict, watching someone else lead instead of leading himself. She was extraordinary. Not reckless, not showy, simply precise, every decision measured, every risk calculated before she took it. She moved through the chaos of the confrontation the way she had walked out of the rejection ceremony months earlier, steady, controlled, entirely without wasted motion. Afterward, as the party regrouped near the trading post to check for injuries and account for everyone present, Cade approached her directly, something he had avoided doing since his arrival at the outpost. "That was well handled," he said. "Thank you, Alpha. I mean it. I haven't seen a rescue operation run that cleanly in years." Nora inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, but did not offer anything further, already turning her attention back to checking on the recovered hostages, one of them a young mother clutching her small child, both of them shaking but unharmed. Cade found himself standing there a moment longer than necessary, watching her crouch down to speak gently to the frightened child, her voice softening in a way it never did when she addressed him, warm and careful and entirely unguarded. He realized, watching this, that he had never once seen that warmth directed at himself. Not before the rejection, not after it. He had spent months telling himself that her composure at the ceremony had been the absence of feeling, a wall she hid behind because she had nothing real underneath it. But here, now, watching her comfort a frightened stranger's child with unguarded gentleness, he understood how wrong that assumption had been. The wall had never been the absence of feeling. It had been a choice, a deliberate, controlled choice not to give him what he had not earned. That evening, back at the outpost, Cade found Edwin waiting in the small guest quarters set aside for the visiting party, a lamp burning low on the table between them. "You saw her out there," Edwin said. "Not really a question." I saw her. And? Cade sat down heavily in the chair across from his advisor, running a hand over his face. I think I misunderstood something, he admitted quietly. Something important. What's that? I thought her silence at the ceremony meant she had nothing left to give me. That she'd already broken, and simply hid it well. He paused, searching for the words. But it wasn't that at all. She had plenty to give. She simply decided I hadn't earned it. Edwin was quiet for a long moment, considering this. That's a harder thing to live with, Alpha, than simple grief would have been. Yes, Cade said. I think it is. Outside, in the guard quarters across the courtyard, Nora sat on the edge of her narrow bed, cleaning a shallow scratch along her forearm that she had not mentioned to anyone during the rescue, too minor to matter, too small to interrupt the work that needed doing. Owen knocked lightly and let himself in without waiting for an answer, dropping down onto the empty chair near her door. You handled that well today, he said. So did you. I mean it, Nora. Whitlock noticed. Everyone noticed. Nora tied off the bandage around her arm and did not respond right away, her expression thoughtful in the low lamplight. I don't need him to notice anything, she said finally. I did what needed doing. That's all it was. Sure, Owen said, though his tone suggested he did not entirely believe the matter was as simple as she made it sound. But for what it's worth, I think today changed something. In him, I mean. Not in you. Nora looked up at him, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. It doesn't matter what changes in him, she said quietly. I already decided what mattered to me. That decision doesn't move just because he finally noticed something he should have seen months ago. Owen nodded slowly, respecting the finality in her voice, and said nothing more on the matter, leaving her alone with her thoughts as the lamp burned low and the cold night settled over the outpost, carrying with it the quiet weight of everything that had shifted that day, unspoken and unresolved, between the Alpha King and the guard who had refused to give him her tears. The inspection party departed the outpost 2 days later, but Cade did not return to the main hall the way he had planned. Instead, he sent Edwin ahead with the escort, while he stayed behind under the excuse of reviewing the eastern boundary defenses following the rival pack's aggression. Nobody at the outpost questioned the decision aloud, though Grace exchanged a knowing look with her second-in-command when the order came through, and the guards took to quietly watching the Alpha King with the kind of curiosity reserved for something unexpected happening in an otherwise predictable routine. Cade told himself he was staying for the boundary review. He reviewed the boundary for exactly 1 afternoon and then found himself with no further official reason to remain, and remained anyway. Daniel noticed the pattern before most, the way Cade's path through the outpost seemed to bend, again and again, toward wherever Nora happened to be working. It bothered him more than he expected it to, a small, persistent unease settling into his chest each time he saw the Alpha King find some reason to linger near the training yard during Nora's sessions with the younger recruits, or find some question to ask her during the evening meal that could easily have waited, or find some report that needed her specific input rather than anyone else's. One evening, Daniel walked Nora back from the mess hall, the same routine they had settled into over the past weeks, and found himself asking the question that had been sitting uneasily in his chest. He's not leaving, Daniel said. I've noticed. Does that bother you? Nora considered the question with her usual care. It doesn't change anything, she said, whether he stays or goes. That's not what I asked. She glanced at him, something like appreciation flickering across her face at his refusal to let her deflect. It bothers me a little, she admitted. Not because I want something from him, because I worked hard to build a life out here that doesn't revolve around him, and every day he stays, I have to work a little harder to keep it that way. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing this. Then, after a pause, he said something that had clearly been building in him for some time. For what it's worth, Nora, I don't need you to have a reason to keep working hard around me. I like who you are right now. I'm not waiting for some healed, finished version of you to show up before I decide you're worth spending my evenings with. Nora stopped walking. It was such a simple thing to say, and yet it landed with more weight than she expected, cutting cleanly through the careful composure she had maintained for months without a single crack. She looked at Daniel for a long moment, searching his face for the performance she had grown so used to detecting in others, the subtle angling for something more than what he claimed to want. She found none of it, only steadiness, only a plain, uncomplicated kindness that asked for nothing in return. "Thank you," she said quietly, and meant it more deeply than the simple words could carry. Word of the growing closeness between Nora and the young guard reached Cade within days, the way most things eventually reached him at the outpost. Through offhand comments and half-noticed glances he was not meant to catch but caught anyway. He told himself it meant nothing to him. He told himself this while finding increasingly thin excuses to remain at the outpost past any reasonable inspection timeline, while finding himself watching, with an unease he refused to name, the easy way Daniel made Nora laugh during evening meals. The unease finally broke open on a cold evening nearly 2 weeks into his extended stay, when Cade found Nora alone near the training yard fence, checking the latches on a gate that had been sticking in the cold weather. "Guard hail," he said, and she turned, straightening at the sound of his voice, her expression settling into the same neutral respect she gave him in every professional exchange. "Alpha." "I wanted to ask you something," Cade said, and found, standing there, that the careful speech he had rehearsed in his head over the preceding days had entirely abandoned him. What came out instead was rougher, more direct than he intended. "Why didn't you cry at the ceremony?" Nora's hand stilled on the gate latch. She did not answer immediately, and for a moment Cade wondered if she would answer at all, or simply walk away the way she had walked out of the hall that night. "Because tears are for people I owe something to," she said finally, her voice level, without anger, without performance, simply stating a fact she had clearly settled long ago. "And you didn't owe me anything anymore, so I didn't owe you my tears either." The words landed in Cade like a physical blow, quiet and precise, cutting far deeper than any accusation could have. He had braced himself for anger, for old hurt finally surfacing after months of buried silence. He had not braced himself for this, for the calm, terrible logic of it, for the way it reframed everything he thought he understood about that night. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "The elders said the bond wasn't settling properly. That waiting any longer would only make things worse for both of us." "Maybe it was the right thing," Nora said. "I've never said it wasn't. I said I didn't owe you tears over it. Those are different things, Alpha. You could at least tell me it hurt." Would that change anything? Cade had no answer for that, and his silence stretched long enough that Nora finally continued, her voice softening slightly, though it lost none of its steadiness. "It hurt," she said simply. "Of course it hurt, but my pain was never yours to witness just because you caused it. I decided that night that I would carry it myself, quietly, and build something with it instead of handing it to you to manage. That's what I did. That's what I've been doing every day since." "With Daniel," Cade said, and immediately regretted the sharpness in his own voice. Nora's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real edge he had seen from her since his arrival. "That's not your business, Alpha." "You're right," Cade said quickly. "I apologize. That wasn't fair of me." She studied him for a long moment, the anger fading as quickly as it had risen, replaced by something more tired, more resigned. "I think you should return to the main hall," she said. "There's nothing here for you to inspect anymore. The boundary is secure. My work is my own. Whatever you're looking for out here, I don't think I'm the one who can give it to you." She turned and walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing alone at the fence in the gathering dark, the cold wind carrying away the last echo of her voice. That night, Cade sat alone in the guest quarters, the lamp burning low, and found himself thinking not about the rejection ceremony, not about the ancient words he had spoken in front of the whole pack, but about the particular sound of Nora's voice saying tears are for people I owe something to, and the terrible clarity of it, the way it had rearranged every assumption he carried about what her silence had meant that night. He had assumed her calm was surrender. It had been the opposite. It had been the deepest form of refusal he had ever encountered, a refusal to hand him anything he had not earned, and in refusing him her tears, she had denied him the one thing that might have let him believe, comfortably, that he had done something small and forgivable, rather than something that had genuinely cost her. Meanwhile, Nora returned to her own quarters and sat for a long while on the edge of her bed, her hands folded in her lap, replaying the conversation in her mind. She had said the words plainly, without drama, the way she had promised herself she would if the question ever came. And yet saying them aloud, finally, after months of silence, had loosened something in her chest that she had not realized was still so tightly wound. Owen found her there a while later, drawn by some instinct that told him she might need company, and sat quietly on the chair near her door, without asking questions, the way he always did. "I told him," Nora said eventually, without needing to be prompted, "why I didn't cry. How did it feel?" She considered the question honestly. Lighter, she admitted, and harder at the same time. Like something that had been sitting on my chest finally moved, even if it didn't disappear. Owen nodded slowly. "Do you think he understood?" "I think," Nora said, "that for the first time since that night, he actually heard me. Whether that changes anything for him, I don't know, but it changed something in me, saying it out loud instead of just carrying it silently." Outside, a cold wind moved across the outpost walls, carrying with it the first hint of an early winter storm rolling down from the northern peaks. Neither of them could have known, sitting there in the quiet lamplight, that within days the Alpha King would make a decision that would cost him far more than a few uncomfortable words spoken at a fence, a decision that would finally test whether his understanding of that night ran deeper than simple regret, or whether it demanded something real from him in return. For now, the night settled quietly over the outpost, carrying its unresolved weight into the darkness, unspoken, unfinished, waiting. Cade left the outpost the following morning, riding back toward the main hall with his small escort, and for the first time in his life as Alpha King, he rode in near total silence, offering none of the usual observations or instructions that filled his journeys, lost instead in a churn of thought he could not seem to quiet. Edwin met him at the hall 3 days later, taking one look at his Alpha's face, and choosing to say nothing at first, simply falling into step beside him as they walked through the familiar corridors. "You look like a man who's decided something," Edwin observed eventually, once they had reached the privacy of Cade's study. "I have," Cade said. "I need to undo the rejection bond." Edwin's expression did not change, though his eyes sharpened with interest. "That's not a simple thing, Alpha. The elders would need to reconvene. The pack would need to witness a reversal ceremony, and reversals are rare enough that most of the older members have never seen one performed. I'm aware. There would be cost involved. A reversal requires the Alpha to relinquish something of equal weight to what was rejected. Tradition. Not law, but tradition the pack takes seriously." "I'm aware of that too," Cade said, and something in his voice carried a weight Edwin had not heard from him before. Not the weight of command, but the weight of a decision already fully considered. "What would you offer?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the training yard below, empty in the gray morning light. "The Eastern Territory claim," he said finally. "The one my father fought 3 seasons to secure. I'll cede it back to the neighboring pack in exchange for a permanent truce along that boundary. It removes a contested claim that's cost lives for 2 generations, and it costs me something real, not just symbolic." Edwin considered this carefully. "That's a significant concession, Alpha. The pack won't take it lightly." "Good," Cade said. "It shouldn't be taken lightly. If I want to undo what I did, it needs to actually cost me something. Otherwise it's just words again, the same as it was the first time." Edwin studied him for a long moment, something like respect settling into his expression. "I'll call the elders together," he said. "But Alpha, I have to ask, does Guardhale know you intend to do this?" "No. Do you intend to tell her before the ceremony, or let her learn of it, the same way she learned of the rejection, standing in front of the whole pack with no warning. Cade considered this, and for the first time in the conversation, his certainty wavered slightly. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't want to make this about a performance for her benefit. I want it to be real, whether she accepts it or not." "Then perhaps," Edwin said carefully, "you should go to her first, quietly, not as Alpha King making a grand announcement, but simply as a man telling her what he intends to do, and letting her decide for herself whether that means anything to her." Cade nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in this, and 2 days later he made the long ride back to the outpost alone, without escort, without banners, dressed in a plain traveling coat rather than the formal black one that marked his rank. He found Nora in the training yard, working with a group of younger recruits on defensive footwork, her attention entirely on correcting a nervous young guard's stance. She noticed his arrival immediately, her body tensing slightly at the sight of him, though she finished the correction before turning to face him fully. "Alpha," she said, cautious now, wary in a way she had not been during his previous visit. "Can we speak?" Cade said, "privately, if you'll allow it." She dismissed the recruits with a short instruction to continue their drills and walked with him to the edge of the training yard, far enough from listening ears that they could speak without an audience. "I intend to call for a reversal ceremony," Cade said, deciding there was no value in circling the point. "To undo the rejection. The elders will convene within the week." Nora's face went carefully still, the same practiced stillness he had watched her wear at the ceremony months earlier, the mask that gave nothing away. "Why?" she said. Not a question exactly, more a demand for honesty. "Because I was wrong," Cade said. "Not wrong to worry about the bond, not wrong to listen to the elders' concerns at the time, but wrong in how I handled it. I stood in front of the whole pack and spoke words that ended something without ever once asking you what you needed, or wanted, or feared. I made a decision about your life as though you were a matter of pack policy rather than a person." "That's a fine speech," Nora said, her voice even, giving nothing away. "What does it cost you?" Cade almost smiled at that, recognizing in the question the same sharp, unflinching practicality that had first drawn his attention months ago. "The Eastern Territory claim," he said. "My father's claim. I'm ceding it back, in exchange for a permanent truce with the pack across that boundary." Nora's composure cracked, just slightly, surprise flickering through her eyes before she caught it and smoothed it away again. "That claim has cost your pack lives for 2 generations. Yes. And you're giving it up. Yes. Because if I'm going to undo what I did to you, it needs to cost me something real. Otherwise it's just an Alpha King rewriting history to make himself feel better, and I won't let it be that." Nora was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with the same careful attention she gave every decision that mattered. "And if I refuse the reversal," she said finally, "what happens to the claim then?" "It's already decided," Cade said. "The claim gets ceded regardless of what you choose. I'm not offering it as payment for your forgiveness. I'm offering it because it's the right thing to do, whether or not you ever want anything to do with me again." This answer seemed to settle something in her, some final piece of doubt she had been holding on to, and her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her expression remained careful, guarded. "I need time," she said. "I'm not going to stand in front of the pack and give you an answer just because you've decided to make a grand gesture. I built a life out here without you. I have people here who matter to me. I won't throw that away simply because you've had a change of heart." "I'm not asking you to throw anything away," Cade said. "I'm asking for the chance to be considered. Nothing more. Take whatever time you need." Nora studied him a moment longer, and then, without another word, turned and walked back toward the training yard, where the recruits waited, leaving Cade standing alone at the fence, unsure whether he had just secured a future or simply confirmed that he had lost one entirely. The reversal ceremony took place 2 weeks later, in the same stone hall where the rejection had happened months before, torches burning in the same brackets, the same pack gathered to witness. Cade stood on the platform and spoke the reversal words before the assembled elders, formally ceding the Eastern Territory claim in the same breath as he offered to undo the rejection, the whole pack murmuring in astonishment at the weight of what he was giving up. Nora stood in the same spot on the floor where she had stood before, though this time her expression was not the frozen mask of that first ceremony, but something more open, more considering, watching him with careful, searching eyes. "The choice is yours," Cade said, once the formal words had been spoken. "I've made my offer. I won't pressure you to accept it in front of everyone, the way I forced my rejection on you before. If you need more time, take it. If your answer is no, I'll accept that too, and I won't ask again." The hall fell silent, waiting. Nora looked around at the gathered pack, at the elders watching with careful attention, at Owen standing near the back with an encouraging, steady expression, at Daniel a few feet away, his face carefully neutral, giving her the same quiet space he always gave her, asking nothing, expecting nothing. She looked back at Cade. "I'm not going to answer that tonight," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Not because I don't have an answer, but because I decided a long time ago that I would never again let this pack watch me make a decision about my own heart in front of a crowd of torches and elders. That's not how I choose to live anymore." A murmur rippled through the gathered pack at this, some surprised, some clearly approving, and Cade, to his credit, simply nodded, accepting the terms without argument. "That's fair," he said. "I'll give you my answer," Nora continued, "when I'm ready and where I choose, and it won't be a performance for anyone's benefit but my own peace of mind." She turned then and walked out of the hall exactly as she had done months before, spine straight, steps steady, giving nothing away to the watching crowd. But this time, as she reached the doors, she paused, just for a moment, and looked back over her shoulder at Cade standing alone on the platform. It was not forgiveness. It was not yet an answer. But it was something new, a small crack of possibility where before there had only been a closed door, and Cade, watching her pause there in the doorway, felt something in his chest ease slightly, the first real hope he had allowed himself since the night he had spoken those ceremonial words and watched her walk away without a single tear. 3 days later, Nora rode alone to the edge of the northern forest where she had once sat with Owen beneath a rising moon, the same place she had gone the night of the rejection, to press her palm against solid bark and let her grief pass through her hand instead of her heart. Cade was already there, waiting, having sent word only that morning that he intended to make the same ride, alone, without escort or ceremony, simply a man waiting at the edge of a forest for whatever answer she chose to give. She dismounted slowly and walked to where he stood. "I'm not agreeing to anything simple," she said. "I want you to understand that. I'm not the same person who stood in that hall months ago. I've built things out here that matter to me. Friendships, purpose, a version of myself I like better than the one who existed before you rejected me." "I don't want you to be that person again," Cade said. "I want to know whoever you've become since." Nora studied him for a long moment, weighing something in her mind, and then, finally, she allowed herself a small, careful smile, the first genuine warmth she had shown him since the night everything had changed between them. "Then we start slowly," she said. "No ceremonies, no crowds, no grand words spoken in front of torches and elders. Just this. Just whatever we choose to build, one honest conversation at a time." Cade nodded, understanding, at last, that whatever came next would not be handed to him easily, would not be forgiven simply because he had made one costly gesture in a crowded hall. It would have to be earned, slowly, deliberately, the same way she had earned every bit of respect and standing she now held at the outpost, one honest day at a time. And for the first time since the night of the rejection, standing there at the edge of the forest, with the cold wind moving through the trees, Cade Whitlock felt something settle in his chest that was not relief and was not victory, but was, perhaps, the quiet beginning of something real.